box at Hollow Creek. In the hills of Appalachian country, where the trees grow thick and the winds whisper through the hollows like lost souls, there's a legend that's been passed down through the generations. It's a story older than the oldest folks in the town of Hollow Creek. A story that's been whispered by those who've gone missing and by those who found their way back. The legend begins with a box. It was said to be small, no bigger than a shoebox, made of wood so dark it looked like it had soaked up the earth's blood. The box appeared in the creek one misty autumn morning, carried along by the current like a forgotten thing. Some say it was a gift from the mountains themselves, others claim it was a curse, sent by spirits angry at the land's trespassers. But no matter where it came from, it didn't take long before strange things began to happen. At first, it was an old farmer, one of the first to lay eyes on the box. His name was Ezra Dale. He was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly, working his land day and night, but when he found the box, it was as if something inside of him had stirred. He said the box called to him in the night, its presence heavy, urging him to open it. And so, one cold evening after finishing his work, Ezra sat by the fire and lifted the lid. Some say there was a flash of light that filled the room. Others claim the box didn't open at all, that it simply vanished in a swirl of mist. But one thing they all agreed on was that Ezra never spoke another word after that night. The next morning, the townsfolk found his farm abandoned, the animals left to roam wild, the crops wilting in the fields. Ezra was gone, vanished into the thin mountain air as if he'd never existed. The only thing left behind was the box, now lying open in the middle of the barn floor. For weeks, the town spoke of nothing else. Folks said Ezra had been taken by the spirits, cursed for opening something he should have left alone. But life went on as it always does. The box, after all, was just another story. But then, others began to vanish, one by one, and all of them had one thing in common. They had come into contact with the box. The sheriff, a burly man by the name of Clyde Thompson, heard the whispers in the wind, saw the worry in the faces of the people he'd sworn to protect, and he set out to investigate. He made his way to Ezra's farm, where the land still seemed untouched, as if the earth itself had swallowed the man whole. The barn stood still, its wooden beams creaking as if it were alive, waiting for the sheriff's arrival. Clyde found the box in the same place, lying open on the barn floor, just as it had been left. He lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hands, a heaviness that made his skin tingle. The box had no hinges, no seams, and yet when he touched it, it seemed to shift, to mold into his palm like it belonged there. It was warm, almost pulsing with energy. But Clyde wasn't foolish. He had heard the stories, the warnings, passed down like old firewood from the elders. He knew better than to open it. He had the box, but he didn't want the curse. Still, curiosity gnawed at him, and just before he turned to leave, something strange happened. A gust of wind howled through the open barn doors, slamming them shut with such force that the walls seemed to rattle. Clyde stood frozen, listening to the creak of the wood around him. It was then he heard a voice that seemed to come from deep within the box, though the box itself didn't move. "Clyde, you don't have to be afraid." The voice was soft, almost soothing, but there was something wrong about it. It wasn't the voice of a man. It wasn't the voice of anyone he knew. And it didn't sound like it was coming from the box. It sounded like it was coming from within his own mind. Clyde set the box down, his heart racing. He backed away slowly, but the barn seemed to close in on him. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the walls groaned as if the whole place were alive, watching him. And that's when he saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the barn, a pale shape hidden in the dark. It was a woman, her face gaunt, her eyes wide and empty. Clyde's breath caught in his throat, and he reached for his revolver, but the figure only smiled, slowly, almost too slowly. "You've touched it now," she whispered, her voice as cold as the winter wind. "You've opened it, Sheriff. You've let the curse in." Before Clyde could react, the figure vanished, leaving only the faint scent of old smoke behind. His hands were shaking as he stumbled out of the barn, the box still sitting there, untouched now by his hands but forever marked in his mind. The next morning, Clyde Thompson vanished. No one saw him leave. His badge was found on the dirt road leading to Ezra's farm, his boots just beyond it, but Clyde was never seen again. The town grew quiet. It was as if the mountains themselves had swallowed him up, leaving no trace. And so, the box remained, waiting for the next person to find it. Years passed, and the town of Hollow Creek became quieter, its once bustling streets empty, its homes abandoned. The box was forgotten by some, but for those who remembered, it was always a whisper on the wind, a flicker of doubt in the dark. One day, a young man by the name of Samuel Harris, an outsider passing through the hills, found himself lost in the woods near Hollow Creek. He was a traveler, a historian by trade, searching for old American folklore and tales to write about. But when he stumbled upon the box, half buried beneath the twisted roots of a tree, he couldn't resist its pull. Samuel picked it up, feeling its cold, solid weight in his hands. He brushed away the dirt, revealing its dark wood and gleaming surface, now slightly worn by time. He knew it was old, knew it had a story. But as he held it in his hands, a strange sense of foreboding crawled up his spine. Something about the box felt wrong, like it had been waiting for him. He had heard the stories of the town, of the cursed box, but Samuel was a man of reason, not superstition. He laughed it off as local lore, something to write about later. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. But when he opened the lid, it wasn't the voice that came this time, it was the silence, a suffocating, terrible silence that spread across the land, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. And then the ground beneath his feet shook. The trees groaned and the earth split open, swallowing him whole. The echoes of Hollow Creek. When Samuel Harris fell, the world seemed to hold its breath. The earth split with a deafening crack, and in that moment, the box, the cursed box, slipped from his hands, landing softly in the newly formed crack in the ground. The darkness that enveloped him was not just the absence of light, but the absence of all sound, as if the very essence of the world had been stolen away. For a long time, Samuel lay there, disoriented, his mind spinning like the storm that had overtaken the town when Ezra disappeared so many years ago. His body ached, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. He tried to call out, but no sound left his mouth. He moved slowly, rising to his feet with a groan, his eyes scanning the abyss around him. The ground beneath him was soft, as if it had been recently disturbed. The air smelled of earth, but there was something else, something familiar yet unnerving. The darkness was thick, oppressive, and Samuel realized with growing dread that he couldn't see the sky, nor could he hear the wind or the chirping of the birds.
In the distance, he thought he saw a faint light, a shimmer, like moonlight on the surface of water. He stumbled toward it, feeling the weight of his own footsteps echoing through the air. But the further he walked, the colder it grew. The light seemed to retreat with each step, as if it were drawing him in deeper. As he moved, Samuel's thoughts raced. He had read about places like this, places where the earth had swallowed souls, where the land was so cursed that time itself seemed to stop. But the stories, the legends, always spoke of an end. The people who disappeared were said to be lost, but no one truly knew what had happened to them. Samuel had always assumed it was just a matter of the unknown, a tale told to keep children away from the woods. Now, standing in the middle of the darkness, he understood. The curse of Hollow Creek wasn't just a story. It was real. Samuel's eyes narrowed as the light flickered again, drawing him closer. He reached out, his fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. The box was there, half buried in the ground, its dark wood gleaming even in the absence of light. He grabbed it, feeling its coldness seeping into his bones. Suddenly, the ground beneath him began to tremble again, and the air shifted, growing thick with the scent of smoke. The shadows around him seemed to grow, stretching toward him like hands, clawing at him with an unnatural hunger. The whisper came again, soft at first, like a breeze through the trees. "Samuel, you've opened it." The voice was familiar, but it wasn't his own. It wasn't Ezra's or Clyde's either. It was deeper, older, filled with the weight of centuries. The voice seemed to surround him, pressing in from all directions. Samuel's heart raced as the shadows closed in. He could feel the weight of the curse pressing against him, like 1,000 eyes watching his every move. The air grew colder, the darkness more suffocating. He dropped the box, letting it fall to the ground, and stumbled backward, panic clawing at his chest. But no matter where he moved, the darkness followed. No matter how far he ran, the shadows reached for him, pulling at him, crawling under his skin. The whispering grew louder, sharper. "Samuel! Samuel, you cannot escape what you've awoken!" His breath came in gasps, and he felt as though the very ground was closing in around him. The shadows reached out for him, their fingers long and twisting, and with each passing moment, they seemed to grow closer, more powerful. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the darkness receded. The whispering stopped. The air cleared. Samuel stood frozen in place, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around, but the world had changed. The trees were gone, replaced by a thick mist that hung in the air like a shroud. The ground beneath him was barren, cracked and dry, like the earth had been scorched. In the distance, he saw movement, a figure, barely visible through the mist. It was tall, cloaked in shadow, with eyes that gleamed like embers in the dark. The figure didn't move, but Samuel could feel its gaze on him, a weight that pressed down on him, suffocating him. The figure raised its hand, and a voice, deep and hollow, echoed through the mist. "Samuel, you have come too far." Samuel's body trembled, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of the curse that had been set in motion. He had come to Hollow Creek, drawn by the box, and now he was part of its history. A piece of the legend that would never be undone. "Turn back," the figure whispered. "Leave before it's too late." But there was no turning back. Samuel had opened the box, and now the curse would claim him, just as it had claimed those before him. The figure stepped forward, its eyes gleaming brighter now, and Samuel could feel the air around him grow heavier, colder. He tried to move, tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey him. The shadows crept closer, curling around him like smoke, seeping into his skin. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the figure was gone. The world around him was still, silent. But then, in the distance, he heard it, the sound of footsteps. A faint, distant thud that grew louder with every passing second. Samuel's heart sank. It wasn't over. The footsteps were drawing closer. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered in his ear. "You're not alone, Samuel. No one ever is." The reckoning. The footsteps echoed louder now, reverberating through the hollow, empty land that stretched out before Samuel. Each step was slow and deliberate, like a drumbeat counting down to something inevitable. His heart hammered in his chest as he strained his ears, trying to hear where they were coming from. The mist seemed to swallow everything, turning the world into a labyrinth of shadows and faint sounds. With each passing second, the oppressive weight of the place grew heavier. The mist curled around Samuel's legs like the fingers of the dead, urging him to move, to escape. But where? There was no path, no road that led out. He was trapped, as if the very land had closed around him, holding him hostage in a timeless void. Then, just as the footsteps reached a crescendo, the mist parted for a brief moment, revealing the figure once again, the same dark, hulking presence, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The figure was closer now, standing just a few feet away from him, its face obscured by shadows, but its presence overwhelming, suffocating. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the pressure in the air, the thick, palpable sensation of something ancient and malicious. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body was paralyzed, trapped by the weight of whatever curse had been unleashed. The figure raised its hand, and the ground beneath Samuel's feet trembled. "You've opened the box," the voice rumbled, deep and hollow. "You've awakened the curse that sleeps beneath this land." Samuel tried to speak, but no words came. The box. The cursed box. He had been drawn to it, as if it had called to him, leading him to this fate. And now, there was no turning back. "You are not the first," the figure continued, its voice laced with something cold, something ancient. "Others have come before you. Those who thought they could control what they did not understand. Those who believed the box was a mere trinket, a curiosity." The figure stepped closer, its form still shrouded in darkness. As it moved, the mist seemed to part around it, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath, faces, twisted in agony, trapped within the folds of time. Their eyes were wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. Samuel stumbled backward, his heart racing. Who are you?" he gasped. The figure's eyes gleamed brighter, glowing with an unholy fire. "I am the keeper," it whispered. "The guardian of the box. The one who ensures that those who open it are bound to it forever." Samuel felt his legs give way beneath him. His knees hit the ground with a dull thud, and he found himself staring up at the figure in dread. He understood now. The curse wasn't just a legend. It was real. And it wasn't just about the box. It was about the souls it had claimed. The box was a prison, and those who found it were destined to become part of its collection, trapped in the darkness for all eternity. The mist closed in around him again, the shadows pressing against his skin, seeping into his bones. He could feel the weight of the souls, the countless lives that had been lost, pulled into the abyss. He could hear their whispers now, distant voices carried by the wind. Their names, their stories, their cries for release. But none of them had escaped. None of them had broken the curse. "No," Samuel whispered, his voice shaking with fear and desperation. "I don't want this. I don't belong here. Let me go." But the keeper only laughed, a sound so hollow and cold that it sent a shiver down Samuel's spine. "You belong here as much as they do," it said. "You have already opened the box. You have already awakened the curse. And now you will join them." The shadows surged forward, wrapping around Samuel's body, pulling him into the earth. He struggled, his fingers digging into the ground, but it was no use. The darkness was too strong, too powerful. It was as though the earth itself had come alive, claiming him, taking him deeper into its cold embrace. But just as he thought he would be swallowed whole, a sharp light cut through the darkness, a beam of pure, blinding light that seemed to come from nowhere, illuminating the figure and the cursed land. The keeper screeched in agony, recoiling from the light, its form flickering like a shadow in the wind. For a moment, everything was still. The mist lifted, and the shadows retreated. The land, once heavy with despair, felt lighter, as if the curse had been lifted, or at least pushed back. And then, in the center of the light, a figure emerged, a woman, her face warm and kind, her eyes filled with sorrow. She stepped toward Samuel, her presence a gentle force that seemed to push the darkness away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "You weren't meant to awaken it." Samuel looked up at her, his heart still racing, but a strange sense of relief washing over him. Who are you?" "I was once like you," the woman said, her voice heavy with years of sorrow. "I was drawn to the box, just like you. I opened it, and it claimed me. But I couldn't let it take anyone else. I couldn't let it take you." She knelt beside him, her hands reaching out to help him up. "I'm the last of those who've been touched by the curse. The last soul who has been set free. But you, Samuel, you're not free yet. You've opened the box. And now you must make a choice." Samuel's heart beat faster, the weight of her words settling into his mind. "What choice?" "You can leave," she said softly. "You can return to the world you knew. But the box will always be with you. It will always call to you, and it will claim you again one day. Or," she hesitated, her gaze distant, "or you can stay. You can take the keeper's place. Become the guardian of the box, and keep others from awakening the curse." Samuel looked down at the cursed box, now resting on the ground before him. It was a small thing, but it held the weight of eternity within its dark wood. He could feel the pull, the temptation to take it in his hands again, to close it forever, to end this nightmare. But he knew what he had to do. With trembling hands, Samuel reached down and closed the box. The light around him grew brighter, and the keeper's form seemed to wither away, vanishing like smoke in the wind. The whispers faded, the mist cleared, and for the first time since he had found the box, Samuel could breathe freely. The curse was broken. But the box, the curse, would always remain. And Samuel would never forget the lesson he had learned in the dark heart of Hollow Creek. The end.